Well, you have seen the headlines. Ukraine just lost its single biggest donor in military aid, and things are about to get real fast. This comes in the wake of the Oval Office meltdown involving Zelensky, Trump, and Vance. It is the main proximate event that led to what we are seeing now, but there are a whole bunch of other things going on simultaneously. Thus, I want to spend the rest of this video, 1. Discussing how much trouble Ukraine is in, 2. How this fits into the broader Trump administration agenda, and 3. The gambit that Russia may currently be pulling. The top line question is what this does for the current military situation. Well, the pure numbers look something like this. Through the end of 2024, U.S. allocations to Ukraine totaled $123 billion. Meanwhile, Europe has allocated about $163 billion. Thus, contrary to some claims from the White House, Europe accounts for more. But you cannot just lose 43% of your support and not have it be a major problem. What we were already witnessing before the announcement on Monday was Europe trying to coordinate support to Ukraine in the absence of the United States. It is a remarkable contrast to the image here from the Russia-US summit, where Europe and Ukraine were absent. By the way, that summit was only 17 days ago. In any case, the question becomes whether Europe will get close to covering the difference. They can, but it would require spending a lot more at a time when there is already financial instability around the continent, in large part because of the war and the lack of Russian gas coming through the pipelines. Then again, having the Russian military get closer to European countries may be even worse for their long-term economic prospects, so perhaps it is time for some deficit spending. However, it is worth noting that you cannot simply replace dollars for euros and call it a day. Some platforms only come from the United States and do not have perfect European substitutes. Think about HIMARS, which has long been a key weapons system for Ukraine's war planning. Even for things that have straightforward substitutes, you cannot just snap your fingers and make it happen. There will be some ramp-up time, though Europe has at least been working proactively on that over the last few weeks with urgency, and longer before that with less urgency. That may help with things that are currently on the shelf, but it will be a lot longer before Europe can actually ramp up production of its own. We are not talking about weeks here. We are talking about years. The upshot for Ukraine is that the situation is not dire. It is easy to forget that blue and yellow soldiers repulsed the Russian advance on Kyiv back in February 2022, even in the absence of significant Western support. To actually threaten Kyiv, Russia would need to mobilize an incredibly large number of soldiers, something that is infeasible to do with the current market rate contracts that Russia is offering. Instead, there would need to be another round of involuntary deployments, like this one announced in September 2022. However, that was incredibly unpopular among Russian citizens, and so there is little risk of that happening again, even if the Kremlin believes that a limited window of opportunity is open. Still, the situation along the Eastern Front has looked a bit better over the last few months. Ukraine has even been successful in some counterattacks as of even more recently. But that is all subject to change real soon, without US aid. Okay, now let's shift gears and go to what the Trump administration is doing here. Part of this is Trump looking for recognition of his place in what he sees as the US-led hierarchy. That aid to Ukraine has been a generous gift, for which Zelensky has shown insufficient gratitude. Kyiv would counter that it is Ukrainian men and women who are dying, which is keeping Russia from shifting its priorities to the rest of Europe or the Western Hemisphere, all to the benefit of Washington, Ottawa, and the European capitals. To be blunt, Trump does not care, and he wants Zelensky to apologize for what went on inside of the Oval Office on Friday. That aside, The bigger picture here is that the Trump administration also does not care about what a peace deal looks like. It just wants a deal done, wherever the line may fall. And worse from Ukraine's perspective, the main part of that Oval Office conversation was about the credibility of holding Russia to a ceasefire line, which Trump dismissed as not being something to worry about, and Zelensky being unconvinced. The result here is that Trump sees the United States as having an agenda-setting role, capable of being the kingmaker of the deal ultimately implemented. And as a result of that, he is looking for extra goodies along the way, say, rare earth minerals. Recall the basics of the conditional armament peace plan that, once upon a time, was Special Envoy to Ukraine Keith Kellogg's proposal to end the war. Imagine that the expected outcome of the war under the status quo is here, and if the United States withdraws aid, it moves somewhere over here, and if the United States massively ramps up aid, it moves way further east. Please do not pay attention to where exactly I have placed the lines, other than noting they're ordering west to east. If both sides believe that there will be follow-through on the threat, then the United States has enormous latitude to implement any of those, and Trump wants to leverage that to get Zelensky to fall in line, under the threat of pushing things in Russia's favor. The problem for Trump is that this is causing strain on the relationship with Europe, because Europe has a much stronger preference to keep Russia as far east as possible. The bigger problem that the Trump administration is soon going to face is that Europe is fast seeing the United States as an unreliable arms production partner, and they further see today's headline as a heel turn that would make even John Cena blush. Europe traditionally buys tons of equipment from the United States, but if Europe now believes that orders will get cut on a whim, then those countries will begin shifting toward domestic manufacturing, and the United States loses out on one of its strongest export industries. Combine that with the repercussions of the tariffs against Canada and Mexico announced on the same night, and you start to wonder what will happen to the US economy. Finally, we should talk about the gambit that Russia may be successfully pulling off here. Let's go back to the conditional armament plan. One question that I often hear about this is what happens if both Ukraine and Russia reject a peace plan? Supposedly, Washington should cut all aid to Ukraine, while massively ramping up aid to Ukraine. Well, what we may be witnessing now is why that is not a feasible outcome, and not the more aid and less aid part. Rather, I'm talking about the behaviors of Kyiv and Moscow. Indeed, the Kremlin has been publicly very positive about a deal, but at the risk of bringing back the old cliché, we should not conclude that the Kremlin necessarily feels that way. The Kremlin has also repeatedly warned that Ukraine's defensive entrenchments are poor right now, and that any pause in the fighting would allow Ukraine to address the problem and ultimately leave Russia worse off. That strategic situation has not changed over the last 2 months, but the Kremlin has become more supportive of Trump's peace plan, again publicly. One way to square that circle is as follows. The Kremlin thinks that Ukraine is going to hold out on a ceasefire, worried that Russia will break it, and the West will not do anything in response. Alternatively, maybe the Kremlin believes that Trump is overplaying his coercive hand with Ukraine, and so the anticipated outcome remains a Ukrainian veto. Either way, the Trump administration blames Ukraine for the absence of an agreement. In turn, Russia obtains the outcome it most wants given its broader constraints. The war can continue so as to prevent Ukraine from building those fortifications, and the United States cuts Ukrainian aid. And that is why it is hard to have a situation where the conditional armament plan results in both parties simultaneously rejecting it. One could always do better by feigning interest in the deal, and then wait for the other side to reject it. If that is what is happening here, then Ukraine has a simple solution, even if it is politically painful. Feign interest as well. Doing that now will not be fun due to recent events, but it is better than ceding the faux peace initiative to Moscow. With that, I cede my time to the next video in your queue. If you want to know what the war used to look like, you can read these awesome books about the conflict. Check the video description for more information about them. And if you are wondering what will happen if this causes greater tension within NATO, I just published a long one about all of the problems that come along with an American withdrawal. For now, though, if you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Take care.